That plant you bought last spring at the garden center, the one the tag described as a fast-growing privacy screen or charming ground cover, may already be doing something to your property that will cost you thousands of dollars and years of your life to reverse. What if I told you that some of the most destructive plants ever introduced to American gardens are being sold right now at major nurseries without a single warning label and without any mention of the state bans that already exist where you live? Number 15 on this list has been documented cracking through building foundations and concrete basement floors, reducing property values in affected areas to the point where mortgages become impossible to obtain. And number 20 was actively promoted by the United States government, which paid American farmers to plant it across millions of acres before anyone realized the catastrophic mistake. And it is still spreading at 1 foot per day across 30 states with no end in sight. Stay until the end, because number 20 explains why the gardening industry never warns you about any of this. Here are 20 destructive plants that will ruin your garden, ranked from seriously damaging to absolutely catastrophic. Mint. Every gardening beginner makes this mistake. One small pot from the nursery, one season of fresh leaves, then underground runners traveling 2 feet in every direction before you notice. By the second season, mint has colonized the entire herb bed. By the third, it has appeared in adjacent flower borders, through the lawn, and in the cracks of the patio. Mentha spreads through stolons, underground runners that produce a new plant at every node and fragment so easily that pulling mint out breaks the root system into dozens of pieces, each one capable of regenerating a complete plant. The iron rule is absolute: container only, solid bottom, rim above soil level. Some gardeners sink a pot into the ground so it looks planted while remaining contained, but the pot must be checked annually for roots escaping through drainage holes. For anyone who has already planted it in the ground, you are looking at years of persistent digging before this plant releases any territory voluntarily. Think of it as the friendly house guest who gradually occupies every room in the house until you cannot remember what the garden looked like before they arrived. English ivy. Madeira helix aerial rootlets penetrate microscopic surface irregularities in brick, mortar, wood siding, and paint, expanding as they grow and gradually destroying whatever surface they have attached to. Studies show that ivy climbing trees adds hundreds of pounds of weight to branches that never evolved to support it, dramatically increasing storm damage risk and creating a highway for pests and diseases to reach the canopy. The seeds that birds eat and deposit across your property establish forest floor mats that prevent native wildflowers and tree seedlings from growing, quietly converting diverse woodland understory into an ivy monoculture, listed as invasive in multiple states, still sold freely at garden centers nationwide. Or think of it as the plant that hugs your trees and your house to death while looking elegant in every photograph taken of the process. Japanese barberry. Research has documented a direct and statistically significant correlation between Japanese barberry density and Lyme disease-carrying tick populations in the same area. The dense, thorny growth creates a specific humid microclimate at ground level that is ideal habitat for blackleg ticks. The berries birds eat disperse seeds into natural areas where impenetrable thorny thickets displace native plants and eliminate habitat for ground nesting birds. Multiple states have banned or restricted its sale. It remains one of the most commonly sold landscape shrubs at garden centers across the country because it tolerates poor soil, handles shade, and deer will not touch it. One the reason deer avoid it is the same reason your yard should. Think of it as the plant that solved your deer problem by creating a tick problem and your ground cover problem by creating an ecological one. Wisteria. Chinese and Japanese wisteria vines grow to the diameter of a human leg and generate compressive force sufficient to crush wooden pergolas, collapse arbors, and deform steel support structures over decades of growth. Trees girdled by wisteria die slowly over years as the vine tightens around the trunk and constricts the flow of nutrients through the bark. Seed pods disperse thousands of seedlings that each become the same monster vine within a few years, ensuring the next generation of the problem is always in progress. American wisteria, Wisteria frutescens, provides comparable flower displays with dramatically reduced vigor and no meaningful invasive spread. Nurseries sell both. The tags rarely explain that the difference between planting one and the other is the difference between a beautiful vine and a decade-long structural management project that eventually requires professional intervention. Think of it as the fairy tale plant that turns every pergola it touches into a slow-motion demolition project. Giant hogweed. The sap of Heracleum mantegasianum contains furanocoumarins that cause phytophotodermatitis. Severe blistering burns that appear hours after skin contacts the sap and is then exposed to sunlight. The scarring can persist for years. Eye contact can cause permanent blindness. The sap is present in every part of the plant and is not always visible. Brushing against it while working nearby on a sunny day in short sleeves produces burns that do not appear until hours later. Burning it releases furanocoumarins into the respiratory tract with potentially life-threatening consequences. If you find it on your property, do not touch it without full protective gear, including gloves, long sleeves, eye protection, and a face shield. Contact your local cooperative extension office before attempting removal. This is not a plant you manage with determination and a pair of garden gloves. Think of it as the plant that looks like a garden feature and functions like a chemical weapon, already established on properties across the northeastern United States and Pacific Northwest, and often unidentified until someone gets badly burned. If you are beginning to understand what is happening here, if you are starting to see that the garden center selling you plants every spring is also selling you problems without the warning labels those problems deserve, hit the like button right now. It helps this reach gardeners who are about to spend money on a plant that will cost them 10 times more to remove than it costs to purchase. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because the plants coming next are where the damage stops being about your garden and starts being about your property value, your neighbors, and your legal liability. Burning bush. The brilliant scarlet fall color of Euonymus elatus is genuine, and the plant earns its popularity in that single season of display. What the tag omits is that the berries birds eat with enthusiasm are distributed throughout natural areas, forest edges, and disturbed sites where the seedlings establish dense thickets that displace native vegetation. Banned in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. On invasive species, watch lists across the northeastern United States and parts of the Midwest. Still sold freely in most states because invasive species regulation varies state by state, creating a situation where a plant banned in one state is available at the garden center of the state directly adjacent. Native blueberries provide identical fall color with the addition of edible fruit and genuine ecological value. Think of it as the plant whose most attractive feature, berry production and bird appeal, is the same feature that makes it an ecological problem once it leaves your yard. Running bamboo. Philostachys rhizomes travel 10 to 15 feet per growing season, diving 3 feet deep, traveling under fences and driveways, and erupting as new shoots through garage floors, basement walls, and the foundations of garden sheds. Spread onto adjacent properties has resulted in legal liability for the original planting homeowner in some jurisdictions. Professional removal costs thousands of dollars and leaves fragments that regenerate into new plants. Prevention is the only practical solution. Industrial-grade rhizome barriers buried 30 inches deep with overlapping seams, inspected annually for breaches. Where nurseries sell running bamboo because it grows fast and creates immediate customer satisfaction. The problems develop over years after the sale is complete, and the plant has already been introduced to your soil. Think of it as the privacy screen that solves your neighbor problem by eventually becoming a legal liability to the same neighbors you were screening against. Japanese knotweed. Fallopoeia japonica rhizomes penetrate 7 feet deep and spread 60 feet horizontally from a single plant. Those rhizomes grow through tiny cracks in concrete, asphalt, and building foundations, expanding as they grow and cracking apart whatever structure they encounter. In the United Kingdom, its presence must be legally disclosed when selling property, and many buyers simply walk away from affected homes entirely. Professional eradication requires 3 to 5 years of repeated treatment and costs thousands of dollars. A rhizome fragment the size of your fingernail can regenerate a complete plant. Never till soil containing it. Each pass of the cultivator chops rhizomes into dozens of fragments and multiplies the infestation with mechanical efficiency. Think of it as the plant that does not just ruin your garden. It attacks your house, your driveway, and your property value simultaneously and with equal enthusiasm for each. Lily of the Valley. Convallaria majalis spreads through underground rhizomes that form dense, impenetrable mats within 2 to 3 seasons, completely excluding every other plant in their path. The rhizomes fragment easily, meaning removal attempts break the system into dozens of regenerating pieces. Every single part of this plant is toxic. Leaves, flowers, berries, and roots all contain cardiac glycosides in concentrations dangerous to children, dogs, and cats. Listed as invasive in multiple states, still displayed in spring bulb sections at garden centers beside daffodils and tulips without any toxicity disclosure on the tag. If you already have it and are determined to keep a contained patch, the only reliable method is growing it in buried containers with solid bottoms that prevent rhizome escape. Think of it as the charming cottage classic that is toxic to everyone in your family except the person who planted it, and that spreads aggressively enough to eliminate every neighboring plant within 3 seasons of establishment. Chameleon plant. Houtunia cordata has leaves that look hand-painted, splashed with red, cream, and green in patterns that photograph beautifully and look striking in the nursery pot. It also produces a strong fishy odor when disturbed that most buyers only encounter after they have already put it in the ground. The rhizomes travel underground in every direction and fragment so easily that any attempt to dig them out guarantees leaving behind dozens of pieces that each regenerate into new plants. Complete eradication requires removing all soil to at least 2 feet depth or multi-year professional herbicide treatment with no guarantee of full success. Gardeners who planted it a decade ago still find it returning in areas they believe thoroughly cleared. Coral bells, Heuchera, provides comparable colorful foliage in dozens of combinations without any invasive risk, without underground rhizomes, and without the smell. One, think of it as the plant that combines the worst rhizome traits of every other entry on this list into one fragrant package that outlasts most gardening careers. Purple leucostrife, a single established Lythrum salicaria plant, produces up to 2 million seeds per year. 2 million. Those seeds spread by water and wildlife into wetlands, marshes, pond edges, and wet meadows where they establish dense monocultures that displace the native sedges, rushes, and wildflowers supporting waterfowl, amphibians, and native pollinators. Wetland restoration projects across multiple states have spent significant public funding removing purple leucostrife from affected areas, funding that represents the true cost of the garden center sales that introduced it. Banned in multiple states, still sold in states without formal listings because the regulatory gap ensures a continuous supply of new introductions. Think of it as the beautiful flower committing ecological destruction at 2 million seeds per year while continuing to be sold in the same garden center where you buy your vegetable starts. And here's number 20, the one I have been building towards since the opening of this video. The plant that represents the most comprehensive example of what happens when the agricultural system, The federal government and the gardening industry combine enthusiastic promotion with zero accountability for long-term consequences. Kudzu Pararia montana was introduced from Japan at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition in 1876 and was subsequently promoted for nearly 70 years as a solution to soil erosion throughout the American South. The United States Department of Agriculture paid American farmers to plant it. The Civilian Conservation Corps planted it across millions of acres during the New Deal era. Kudzu clubs formed across the Southeast to celebrate its promise. Promotional literature described it as a wonder plant. By the 1950s, the consequences were impossible to ignore. Kudzu grows 1 foot per day during peak summer growing season. That is not a figure of speech or an approximation. It is a documented rate confirmed across decades of research. The vines smother entire tree canopies, climbing to the top and spreading laterally until no light reaches the foliage below. Trees die. Forests are converted to monocultures of vines that provide no ecological function for the native wildlife that depended on the vegetation they replaced. Driving through heavily affected areas in the southeastern United States, you see landscapes where green waves appear to have frozen in place, covering everything: trees, fences, abandoned structures, and utility poles, under a single continuous blanket of vine. Kudzu now covers more than 7 million acres across 30 states. The ecological cost is measured in forests eliminated and agricultural land lost. The economic cost is measured in hundreds of millions of dollars spent annually on control efforts that manage but cannot eradicate the infestation that federal programs created. Complete eradication from a single residential property requires identifying and killing every root crown, a root system that can weigh hundreds of pounds and penetrate 10 feet deep, through repeated herbicide application over 5 to 10 years, combined in some cases with managed grazing by goats, which are among the few animals that consume kudzu with enthusiasm. Every single root crown that survives the eradication process regenerates the entire infestation. There is no shortcut. There is no partial solution that holds. The plant is still spreading every single day across the 30 states where it has established. The reason kudzu earns the final position on this list is not only because of its speed or its scale. It is because kudzu is the definitive answer to the question of what happens when a plant with aggressive growth, to impossible eradication, and no natural controls meets an agricultural system that prioritizes short-term benefit over long-term accountability. That combination, available plant, enthusiastic promotion, no warning label, is the same combination that characterizes every plant on this list at the moment of its introduction to your garden. Think of it as the vine that the United States government planted across millions of acres before reading the label, and a permanent reminder that the absence of a warning has never once meant the absence of a problem. 20 plants. Every one of them sold at garden centers or promoted by government programs without adequate disclosure of what they would eventually do to the properties, ecosystems, and bank accounts of people who trusted that silence meant safety. The gardening industry profits from sales. Warning labels reduce sales. That is the entire explanation for why you found out about these plants here, rather than at the nursery where you bought them. If you are the kind of person who works hard on their property and believes you deserve honest information before you spend your money and your weekends, you already know what to do next. Tell me in the comments, which of these 20 plants do you already have in your yard? Have you been fighting one for years without knowing what you were dealing with? Drop your story below. I read everyone. Subscribe so you do not miss what is coming, because the next video exposes something the landscaping industry has been hiding for decades, and that is already in more yards than any plant on this list.